Hello everyone, welcome to the EasyPower Thursday webinar series. My name is Jim Chastain. I'm the host for today's session, and is our habit, before we introduce the speaker for today, I'd like to conduct a couple poll questions to kind of get everyone in the mood. And so by all means, please participate and help us deliver the most relevant message that we can. So the first question that we're going to be going after today is, does your company have developed and implemented an electrical safety program? So if you would please respond. All right, looks like we're getting a quorum. We'll leave this on for another 10 seconds. So here's how folks have weighed in on this particular question. And I wanted to give a couple minutes so that Terry can make sure he refers to these answers as he goes through his presentation. The next question is, have you audited your electrical safety program? And I expect, based upon the attendee list, registration list, we have a lot of safety specialists in the market, so I think this will be good information for all. So it looks like we have a pretty good split on this question. The third question is, have you updated your electrical safety program to be in line with the upcoming changes in NFPA 70E? A little bit more for the quorum here, and we're getting close. So it looks like, as expected, we have a few people that are ahead of the game. Bless your hearts. The next question is, are you aware of the changes in I-1584 2018 version? So a few more seconds as we're getting a quorum established. So here's how we look on the responses for updating to the 1584 standard. The next question is, have you updated your existing arc flash to reflect that? All right, it looks like we have a quorum here. Here's how the responses looked there. This is a good one too. Is your company aware of the new developments in arc flash PPE, specifically the true color lens technology? All right, here's how people have responded there. Obviously, we have folks keeping up with things. And then the last question, does your company have a formal change management procedure? And here's how people have responded to the last question. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Now we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, and you're more than welcome to enter questions as we go along, and Terry will be addressing those during his presentation. Again, he's a good friend and a repeating presenter on the EasyPower webinar series. And so at this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to Mr. Becker. Terry, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jim. So again, welcome everybody today to today's webinar, and the poll questions will come into play a little bit later on as we get into the webinar. So again, today's webinar is on electrical safety program, 70E Z462 2021 editions, management of change. But as you'll see as we get into the webinar, there's going to be more detail other than 70 and Z462 that impact your electrical safety program. So just a little bit of background on myself, and I'm not going to dwell on this too long. I reside in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'm a certified electrical safety compliance professional, an IEEE senior member. I've got 29 years experience in electrical engineering. My career started in the oil and gas business, and then I've been doing independent electrical safety consulting for 13 years, supporting industry across Canada and some work in the US. Way back 14 years ago, I became the first vice chair of the Z462 Technical Committee, and I'm currently a voting member on our Canadian equivalent of NFPA 70E. I'm also the working group leader for clauses 4.1 and the annexes. We have also CSA Z463 in Canada. It's a maintenance of electrical system standard, which is really the equivalent of your NFPA 70B in the US. I'm a voting member on that tech committee as well. And I've been on the IEEE 1584 a Guide for Performing Arc Flash Hazard Calculations Tech Committee for quite some time. And I also participated in the IEEE 1584.1 subcommittee. So again, 13 years specifically devoted to electrical safety. I've completed external electrical safety audits. I develop programs. I do electrical safety program rollout training. I developed e-learning for arc flash and shock. I do instructor-led training, electrical safety competency validation, and I regularly share in webinars like this, but specifically conferences and workshops in Canada, the US, Australia, and I actually presented in India on the topic of electrical safety as well. So a bit of a disclaimer again, I'm talking about some of the standards here, and by no means am I representing any of these organizations. So this information today is my personal technical interpretation of myself and my company. Again, if you have any specific questions about NFPA 70E, please contact NFPA. If you have specific questions about CSA Z462, please contact the CSA group. And similarly for IEEE 1584, please contact them for official interpretation, as I will be providing some interpretation and guidance. And again, that'll be my, again, professional interpretation and opinions. So the agenda for today, the poll questions, Jim, thank you very much. I did take those down, the notes of the results, and when it comes up in the webinar, you'll see why I was asking those questions. Brief introduction, why have formal management change? And I think this is an element that I know I don't see with industry related to their electrical safety programs, if one is developed. But I hope after today's webinar, you'll realize that there is some significant issues here, and we need a formal management change process. The formality of this topic of electrical safety and arc flash and shock is really what's been missing in industry. I do not see a lot of electrical safety programs developed. We had, in the poll, it looks like 80% of the attendees said they did have a program developed, 20% said they didn't, but some said they haven't implemented it, so it's in development. And that's interesting. And again, it's a telling story, as well as when we get to the audit piece, we almost had like a 50-50, if we have a program, we have or haven't audited. So the formality of this is how you will ensure that your due diligence is appropriate and defendable. And ultimately, the residual risk to your workers when they work energized is true. And we'll get into that topic as well. So I'm going to cover some of the 70E and Z462 changes. And if you are online from Canada, you'll get some new information you possibly haven't heard up until this point in time. Z462 will publish most likely by the middle of January 2021. We always lag 70E. It's just the way that the cycles are with publishing between NFPA and Z462. So 70E 2021 published in September, and we always have lagged. So I'm going to present some information that will most likely be published at this point. Again, I'm a voting member. I'm aware of the changes, so I'll be presenting that. Also for the US, it's going to give you a flavor of some of the technical changes in Z462 that are not in 70E that you may want to pay attention to. 1584, 2018 edition, Jim said it's published. It's been out there for almost 2 years, I think 2 years actually. And again, the answers to the poll question there were interesting, and we'll get there. And some of the requirements of the new 1584 are significant. Again, formal management change, control by the employer or the electrical equipment owner is required, and formality, right? We'll get into that. Arc flash PPE, I bring it up because I still don't think that people are aware of some of the changes, specifically in arc-rated face shields and arc flash suit technology. So again, we'll cover that briefly. Again, I want to highlight some of these things, make you aware of them, but stress that management of change related ultimately to a documented electrical safety program needs to be a framework or table of contents element of that electrical safety program. And then we'll just sort of end by summarizing, again, this formality of management change, conclusion, and questions. So NFPA 70 and Z462, they include the requirement for audit. It's been there, I don't know how, probably since the beginning, but the audit has been added to the requirements of it. So we'll review that. The outcome of audit will be corrective actions, will be change, right? And again, the benefit of that audit is to identify the gaps, right? To, in this case, standards potentially, and we'll review other gaps that the audit may bring forward, and that you move forward with those changes to get the benefit. to make sure that your electrical safety program is working as you expect it to work, and that the results, meaning, and I'm going to talk about it throughout the webinar, the results relate to risk. 70E and Z462 are risk assessment based. The risk assessment procedure is a mandatory requirement of your electrical safety program. Managing change ensures that the residual risk that you determine for work tasks that qualified persons perform is real. And that's important to them, and it's important to the supervisor and ultimately the employer. So again, in this webinar, I'm going to briefly review some of those changes. And there has been other webinars and other information on the changes. This webinar is not specifically about that, but I'm going to go over it again to place emphasis on the need for formality of dealing with change, right? And on multiple fronts, specifically the standards, but there'll be some other elements that we'll cover as well. So MOC related to the changes based on 70E and Z462. Some of them are significant depending on the standard. I said we have technical divergence now. So for Canada, if you're using Z462, I'm going to highlight some of those. For the US, the technical changes that I'm going to expose you to for Canada, you're not going to be aware of because we don't have alignment this time around. We have technical divergence. IEEE 1584, as I said, requires, in my opinion, formal change, or else what's going to happen is potentially several things: uncontrolled costs, poor quality reports, more bad arc, flash, and shock equipment labels that aren't appropriate and compliant, and inflated incident energy calculations potentially. So the employer and the equipment owner needs to have more control via management change processes, engagement at the management level, supervisory level, capital projects team within your department if you're big enough to control that outcome from the new 1584. And then the PP piece. So this is the ongoing maintenance of your electrical safety program. These things impact that the integrity of your program is maintained. And I find a lot of companies maybe develop a program and they don't audit it and they don't maintain it and then they don't update it. They skip an addition of 70E and then they sort of get back on board, but you've missed things along the way. And if you ever tested your program with an incident, that's where gaps may come forward. So the audit is the tool to use to identify the gaps that would institute the need for formal change management, right? So management change, again, if it's done formally, the benefits is what I want to discuss in today's webinar. So 70E and Z462 document a mandatory requirement, and the auditing is the electrical safety program audit. It has a 3-year frequency on it. I personally recommend that the electrical safety program is audited annually, not every 3 years. The 3 years aligns with 70E and Z462 changing, but you shouldn't let your program be stagnant for 3 years. There should be at least an annual audit, a review of your program, and because things can change in that year related to other topics, regulations change, other standards change, new technologies brought to the market by electrical equipment manufacturers. So your program is not just influenced by every 3 years, 70E and Z462 changing. And as we go through this webinar, you'll go, yeah, you're right, Terry. There's other things here that impact my program, and I should be reviewing it and auditing it annually. There's a field work audit requirement, that's annual. And really, I call that supervisory level. So again, it's at the supervisory level, day to day, week to week, month to month. Make sure the program's working, make sure your workers, their qualified persons are qualified and competent, and that they're following the requirements of the program and their day-to-day execution of what I call the energized electrical job workflow, right? Work order management, reactive work management, and every day they're applying the requirements of the program. 70 and Z462 include LOCO program procedure audit requirements. Now that would really be a component of the employer's overall occupational health and safety management system. So really that would be the safety department, but for the electrical maintenance department or task qualified workers, instrumentation workers, the departments that have those workers in them, really this is critical, right? So you might participate at some level, but you'd find that the LOCO program procedure audit is driven by the health and safety environmental department. But obviously to the topic of electrical work, it's a significant component of 70E and Z462, thus the content that's in both standards and the need and the flagging of auditing the LOCO program and procedures. Really, management of change would be expected by the regulator, right? I think if you look at the entire due diligence discussion, which we don't have enough time to talk about, that might be a whole other webinars discussing due diligence and what it means and how you define that within your company. But I think the regulator expects that you audit and you manage change, and really you're validating your due diligence that it's working when you do audit, and then you implement the change so it's formal, the management's aware, you can get budget money as well. This is the other benefit of formal management change. It brings to light that we need an ongoing budget for electrical safety for all aspects of what I'm going to be presenting today. Sustainable and measurable results. So this is an element of that with respect to your electrical safety program, consistent with occupational health and safety management system standards. So again, why formal management change? The occupational health and safety management system standards themselves promote a plan, do, check, act philosophy. The check is the audit, the act is implement the corrective actions. Interesting enough, on the bottom left of this slide is OSHA in the States provides quite a bit of guidance on occupational health and safety management systems. If you're not aware, that document, recommended practice for safety and health programs, is public domain on OSHA's website. And within it, it says program evaluation and improvement as one of the elements. And you can see there's 8 elements in that pie chart, right? So actually 7 elements, right? 2, 4, 6, 7. So they identify it and flag it, right? So if you aren't aware of that document, Google it, get it, read it. This relates to your occupational health and safety management program. OSHA provides guidance, and you can use this document to audit your electrical safety program. And again, program evaluation improvement would push the MOC process. We have the ANSI Z10 standard as well, which also includes the Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy, and so does Canada's adoption of ISO 45001 as Z462 45001. So Plan, Do, Check, Act is audit, and again, the formality of the outcome of the audit is management of change. So this Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy, again, we plan against, in this case, regulatory legal requirements, really the OH&S regulations, right? We want to implement, right, hierarchy of risk control methods to achieve the goal, which is, again, managing risk to workers by eliminating first and or reducing risk by applying the hierarchy of risk control methods. We check with the audit piece, real-time monitoring and measuring, weekly, monthly, right, annually. And then the audit piece is that oversight, that focus, very formal, right, review, right, internal electrical safety audit, external electrical safety audit, the supervisory level audit, inspections. These are all components of what the government expects you to be doing. In this case, I'm trying to place emphasis under your electrical safety program is where we need this information to be managed specific to arc, flash, and shock hazards. Then we get to the act piece, which is implement the changes, implement the corrective actions, right? Stay current, right, with the regulations and their requirements. Stay current with the requirements of the applicable standards that you're using as a base of due diligence. So changes to occupational health and safety regulations, we need to formally keep our eye on that. They may not change at a regular cycle. Something may change due to, again, an increase in incidents in this case, and maybe the regulator puts focus on that. In Ontario, Canada, as we were getting into arc, flash, and shock, the Ministry of Labour did electrical safety blitzes. Poof, right? They placed focus on it, right? And that increased awareness, I think, of, you know, Ontario employers. But the regulator, they can bring out changes to their regulations. You need to formalize that change. Again, management needs to know, management needs to sign off, supervision, right, when you are aware of these things, and you need to implement the required changes to the benefit, again, of our goal, elimination or risk reduction. Electrical equipment technology. In the 13 years that I've focused my career on electrical safety, it's unbelievable what's been going on, and it's quite amazing, right? So I've seen the demand, you know, our demand increases for improvements from the manufacturers, and the broad stroke of manufacturers out there have brought new technology to the table. And this has evolved, it's quite mature. I think there's still some more positive developments to come, but you've got to, again, watch for this. You just can't sit on the sidelines. You've got to be aware of what's going on, stay engaged. If you're your company's electrical safety program manager, this is part of your role, is to stay current with what's going on with the regulations, electrical equipment changes that can have a positive impact on substitution and safety by design or prevention through design. Changes in the standards, which I've highlighted, but now on this slide, there's other standards we need to be aware of and manage the change that they will impose on our electrical safety program. The National Electrical Code. The National Electrical Code is different than the CE Code Part 1 in Canada. The NEC has a lot of content in it related to arc flash. right? And protection unfortunately, the C code has not gone down that path. So if the NEC changes some of those requirements, you need to formally be aware of that. The NEC is adopted into law, the C code is adopted into law, so you need to be aware of that. 70 and Z462, as I've mentioned, IEEE 1584, other related standards. Now on the maintenance side, condition of maintenance is a key variable related to arcing fault probability. It's embedded in table 130.C5 in 70E and table 2 in Z462. So 70B is evolving right now. I think it's in revision. We published Z463, Canada's equivalent, as a standard in 2018. We've got the ANSI, NETA, ATS, and MTS standards. They regularly update. So again, on the maintenance side of this topic, as a variable of the risk assessment life of occurrence parameter, you need to be aware of what's going on there. And ASTM, changes in the standards related to the PP, the evolution of a arc-rated glove, right? Lots of confusion on that arc-rated glove, though. Be very careful. An arc-rated glove is not a rubber insulating glove. So be careful when you do look at some of these things and the potential opportunity that you don't misinterpret them. So your electrical safety program, it needs to have specific requirements related to the program itself. So changes in the power distribution system, those need a formal MOC. In turn, that will also be the single line diagrams and any other critical drawings. The digital power system model that relates to those changes, it needs to be updated and changed and then reissued. You need another PE or PN stamp report to be available to your employers or your third-party contractors who ask to see that report so they can validate the arc flash and shock equipment label data. Updates to the incident energy analysis portion of that power system study, and really critical now with the 1584 changes, specific to your power distribution system, and the most significant impact on incident energy is the protective device changes. Any changes to relays, circuit breakers, fuses, incident reduction methods and strategies that are installed. So again, manage those formally. Updates to the labels that result. All of this should be signed off. Management needs to be aware. This is a point of influence with management, right? One, they're ultimately accountable for your occupational health and safety statement, and they need to be able to stand behind that. So we need to make them aware of these critical changes that impact arc flash and shock hazards. Installing temporary power systems, that should be MOC'd. Temporary power needs to be installed to the NEC or the CEC, but if it's not managed properly, the likely occurrence of exposure to arc flash and shock hazards can increase with temporary power systems. I'm talking significantly large temporary power systems for large construction sites, or when you're at a large industrial facility, you're doing a major outage. Changes in work task risk assessment procedure and the risk register table. I'm not sure if your electrical safety program has an electrical hazard risk assessment matrix. It should, and it should have a risk register table that's work task based. All right, so all of the changes I'm talking about ultimately can impact your risk assessment, and hopefully in a positive manner, because all these changes should be positive with respect to potential injury or damage to health or likelihood of occurrence. Updating electrical safe work procedures should be formally signed off. Again, management, supervision, even the worker, right, should be signing off on a formal MOC that they're receiving these new procedures. They're aware of it. They've been trained on those new procedures. The program itself needs formal MOC, right? Management is standing behind this. You're the electrical safety program manager. There's changes. This is something they need to sign off on. The main document, appendices, forms, flowcharts, checklists, the risk assessment matrix, the risk register table. So this is all critical, again, to the credibility of all this, but ensuring that you have management influence, you can get budget dollars, right? And that at the end of the day, you're a company and the management supervision level, right, understand that everything that you've done to date, everything that you are doing, everything that you need to do is, again, achieving the goal, elimination of exposure or reducing risk, and we can stand behind it. This is a new diagram that I've come up with recently, Electrical Safety Program Due Diligence Framework. So I've talked about a lot of this already, the regulations at the top, just general duty clause, employer has to identify hazards, eliminate exposure, implement risk control methods to reduce risk if they can't eliminate. And then we have occupational health and safety management system standards. The electrical safety program is underneath that occupational health and safety management system standard. And the framework and table of contents of your electrical safety program should be consistent with the Occupational Health and Safety Management System standards and 70E and Z462. We have the hazard ID and risk assessment piece, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, overarching philosophy, the hierarchy of risk control methods, and then we use these standards as tools and the base of our due diligence. There's a lot going on here. You need to make sure you formally review all elements of this flowchart and that all of these things are contributing ultimately, again, to elimination and risk reduction. So thus I asked if your company has a program or not, and it looks like 80% responded yes, 20% said no. And then it looked like some said they maybe hadn't developed it. The audit piece, this is where we had 55% said yes, 45% said no. So that should be 100% yes. It's critical you audit your electrical safety program, and it's a mandatory requirement of 70E at 3 levels: the program, the field audit, and the lockout piece. So we need some improvements there. It's critical that you audit. You don't know if your program's working if you don't audit it. And then the last one was, this was interesting because if you have a program, 6% said that they've updated their electrical safety program. 70E's been published now for 3 months. You don't immediately have to update your program, but it should be something that's scheduled and prioritized with an end date. And in reality, in my opinion, it should be within at least the first 6 months after published that you update your program. All right. The previous edition of 70E is no longer applicable. The same thing with Z462. The latest edition is what you would be held accountable to from a due diligence perspective. So the evolution of 70 and Z462, I basically got 5 editions. This is aligned with when we first had Z462 in Canada, and that was for the 2009 edition. And again, the blue line indicates where they diverged and they became risk assessment based standards, and that has been maintained into the latest editions, the 2021 editions. I'm not going to go through this content in detail, but 70E, again, what's happened, it really does impact your electrical safety program. Thus, it's really important that you audit your program against these new requirements and ensure your program aligns with these changes. There was a lot of shuffling between Article 130 and 110 in 70E, and it predominantly relates to your electrical safety program and ensuring that you have this information included and in this sort of organizational structure, right? So there's a need for defined policy, priorities elimination, electrically safe work condition, energized work, and the program. And the program piece in 70E and Z462 is quite explicit. So make sure that your program complies with that minimum requirement, because that's where you would be held accountable to first, is when you tell the regulator we're using 70E, right? They would expect that you are complying with it, and these are mandatory requirements. By the way, 70E and Z462 are not adopted into OH&S regulations still. So it's all voluntary, but OSHA and in Canada, the regulator's aware, and I think they would hold you accountable as an industry. They're industry best practices widely used, and you can't get around that. All right, so the realignment in 70, I think, was excellent in making sure that your program has this focus, because the information was sort of back in Article 130, and the same thing with CSA Z462. So again, the reference to NC 10 was just moved into Annex P, but what was interesting is Annex P now added ISO 45001, which is again occupational health and safety management standards, but it's the global standard, and again, Canada just adopted ISO 45001. So it has the Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy in it, FYI. All right, so your electrical safety program should be audited against these standards. Well, now there's a reference to ISO 45001, so you should take a look at it. It will be consistent with NC 10, but you formalize this process. You can say that you have looked at it, and these are the gaps, and you document that, either in a note document, or you have a meeting, your electrical safety committee, program manager presents it, and then that information is minuted. Document, document, document when it comes to anything related to workplace health and safety. All right, some wording changes, job safety planning. So there's now an example checklist in Annex J. So you have an example of a document to prove that the job safety planning was documented by the qualified person. Lockout tagout program, again, it can be part of your program or a separate program. Typically, lockout tagout is a separate program from your electrical safety program. Article 130, again, the content here was moved to 110, so there was a reorganization of the front end, which really right now gets into the permit the energized electrical work permit, and then right into the shock risk assessment and the arc flash risk assessment pieces. All right, and then Article 130 will apply to either incident energy analysis or the arc flash PP category method being used. Just some clarifications here on incident energy analysis. Again, clothing, the outer layer, when it's worn for weather, it's not your primary arc rating layer. The layer underneath is. This was Article 137C1, and again, for proving absence of voltage, if the PPE that you have is not greater than or equal to the incident energy, then what other methods can we use risk-based to deal with the fact that we don't have enough PPE? The big change in 70E was the inclusion of capacitors, and this is a huge endeavor that was offered, and it is a significant technical content change we will not have in Z462. As well as Annex F, there was a battery risk assessment flowchart that's a great visual tool with respect to UPS batteries. So again, that Article 360, requirements for capacitors, completely new article, laboratory research, public comment, and so give lots of credit to the U.S. Department of Energy laboratories in the U.S. and their contribution to 70E, which benefits all of us. Annexes in 70E, Annex D, again, the 1584 content was updated, the battery risk assessment, job safety planning checklist, and the new capacitors annex. Z462, now this is new information that I haven't presented previously. So we adopted, meaning CSA adopted ISO 45001. That's the first significant change. We did the reorg, so there's been a reorg between Clause 4.1 and 4.3, which is Article 110 and 130 and 70E. So we did a similar reorganization, different language, but again, it realigns the need in Canada to review this, to audit it, update your program, right? So there's the same sort of alignment at the front end. What else? Normal equipment condition is part of the risk assessment. This is a change from 70E. Normal equipment condition is part of the risk assessment procedure, whereas in 70E it was not. It was moved, but it wasn't put under the risk assessment procedure. This one's interesting. Training now can include interactive electronic or interactive web-based training, just in time for our current situation with COVID. Lots of web-based training, which is very effective, by the way. Again, we had the big push in Z462 where we realigned content from Clause 4.3 to 4.1. And then Table 2, we added a new work task, which 70E did as well, that for circuit breakers on first energization or after significant maintenance, the likelihood of occurrence of an arcing fault is yes. This is what I wanted to get to for Z462. 70E will not include this content. We had the luxury to review the IEEE 1584 2018 edition, and we recalculated the incident energy for the arc flash PP category table method. This is table 137C15A in 70E or table 6A in Z462. For low voltage switchgear, we added a category 5, an arc flash PP category 5, min 75 calories. So this is not in 70E, but if you're listening, you should pay attention because currently that work task using the new formulas from IEEE 1584 yields over 70 calories, right, of incident energy. So this is, again, technical divergence, but this is important for you in the US because right now that work task will have a lower ATV of arc flash clothing, min 40, if you use the new formulas in 1584 and the parameters listed to calculate the incident energy. So we have 5 categories now in Z462, arc flash category 5, min 75. So the other significant changes are we have additional annexes that 70 doesn't have. We've added high voltage related electrical work task annexes for switching and isolation and temporary protected grounding. We completely rewrote Annex A because of the change to ISO 45001. There were changes in Annex I. We added a different job planning checklist than 70E. Annex K, and this happened in 70E, there was significant updates to the arc blast pressure and defining that it's not what it was made out to be previously. And I'm very quickly trying to get through the annexes here for Z462, the new Annex V. We updated our labeling annex, which you don't have in 70E. Again, the 2 high voltage annexes. And then Annex V is a new alternate table to Table 6A for AC electrical equipment, or your table 130.7C15A. The biggest change here with a significant impact that needs formal management change is this new table V1 in Z462 includes 240 volt single phase electrical equipment as sustaining an arcing fault. And we will also have the arc flash P category 5 in this new table as well. So this is a significant divergence in technical content between 70E and Z462. So again, I'm trying to make a point that this is very important, that this be reviewed by industry on the 240 volt single phase arcing fault sustainability inclusion now in Z462 to publish in the first 2 weeks of January. It'll be in a new alternate table, arc flash category table method, but that table will be a mandatory table. It will not be an information-based annex. It'll be a normative table that you can use either table 6A or table V1, and those tables do not align. We created table V1 with the original intent to have a table that's easier for the qualified person to use. No calculations of fault current, just the rating on the transformer, the breaker, right, the fuse, right, and that's all they have to check. Then calculations are done underneath that, but what happened is 240 volt single phase electrical equipment was inserted into table V1. So again, this is a significant change in Canada, and it doesn't currently impact 70E. You might see some of this come forward in 2024. So poll question 4, were you aware of the 1584 changes? And again, we had 67% yes, 33% said no. As far as the updating your studies, this was sort of almost 50-50. Okay, and that doesn't surprise me. So significant changes in 1584. The formulas are all new, the parameters, some of the same parameters, but some new parameters here that you need to understand. So meaning the owner of the electrical equipment. The consultant needs to understand them too, and the consultant, the PE or PEng electrical engineer, needs to make sure that they are not conservative, that they are realistic. Good engineering practices are required here. I've reviewed too many reports from my clients where there's been errors in emissions and misinformation. My concern is this will be further exasperated with the new 1584. The employer, the owner of the electrical equipment, needs a defined technical specification. Again, management of change. Right? The way you do that effectively is with documentation. A tech spec where you control the scope of work, therefore you control the costs, the expected quality of the report, the study details, the parameter selection, the report content, and the arc flash and shock equipment label. The employer needs to control the specification for the label, not the consultant. I've seen too many labels that are non-compliant, misinformation, errors and omissions. So the employer, again, management change, formality required here if you've got these studies done. And you will get the advantage of everything that I'm outlining if you have a formal management change and a tech spec. So this is just a summary table. Again, some of the parameters that need to be managed. Modes of operation, the 2-second guideline is still there. Conductor gap, box correction factor. The most critical element that's new is the addition of additional box electrode configurations in the impact. The HCB horizontal conductor box parameter can lead to an increase in its energy of up to 200%. And then VCB versus VCBB. VCBB and HCB are new. You need to understand the implications, not only of those configurations, but the other elements I'm outlining, right? And this is just, again, another slide that I've generated. These aren't tables from 1584. These are tables that I embed in an electrical safety program. So the electrical safety program controls these studies through a technical specification. So these are the box electrical configurations, a brief explanation, and then really some summary information on where they apply and the potential impact of those 2 incident energy outcome calculations piece. These are compliant labels, right? So these are compliant labels, and I can substantiate it. Really, we've got, unfortunately, 10 years of studies and all sorts of labels, different ones in Canada and the same thing in the States. So again, the employer needs to control the labels. As far as poll question 6, it was interesting because only 29% of everybody attending said they're aware of the true color gray lens technology. And this is the benefit, is on the left is what you would see through the green shield for an MCC starter bucket. In the middle, that picture is taken through the true color gray lens on the right. And also the addition of LEDs, you can see the work test lighting improves. So this has a positive impact on life of occurrence. It's interesting because PP is protective, but PP can also contribute to prevention through a positive impact on life of occurrence. And then there's an arc flash suit where you can see the workers' faces through the lens. That's the true color gray lens technology. But before, you wouldn't necessarily see the worker's face, even with the green tint, and then LED lamps on everything, right? So it's important, again, that you're aware of changes to PPE, and then you inject those changes with budgeting and buy this new PPE and get it to your qualified persons. The formal management change piece, and I'm hoping by now, the emphasis I've made here is this formality ensures that you track all of these things changing, you formally have a process, and this is an example of an MOC sign-off form. So you have sign-off by management, other engineering, could be the capital projects department, supervision, safety department, but the formality of it will get the long-term sustainability and performance of your electrical safety program. Formal management change is a valuable asset in your electrical safety program. All right, so this aligns with the expectations of the electrical safety program, the outcome of audit, program integrity, and confirming and maintaining work task residual risk levels. The proper, effective application of the hierarchy of risk control methods. It needs to get to management, supervision, safety, other people to be made aware. Capital projects, folks, you need to influence those budgets. Your program should have a design-based memorandum for new projects. Influence the capital projects. Make it a formal MOC requirement that an electrical safety-related DBM is leveraged to the capital projects group from the electrical safety program. So the program itself needs MOC. The content, ultimately, the program is rather important because it should be driving the rest of this, as noted earlier with the program content that I reviewed. So again, I have been moving fairly quickly. I usually, if you know me, try to cover a lot of content. So I've gotten to the point where I want to conclude the webinar, open it up for Q&A. So again, conclusion, 70 EN Z462, 2021 editions, mandatory requirement for audit. The outcome of the audit will be corrective actions. Those corrective actions should follow a formal MOC process. Get the right people involved, make them aware, be able to budget, right? And ultimately, then we get the benefit of those changes, right? The program itself, right? You need to consider changes related to OH&S regulations, 70E and Z462 and their 3-year cycles, IEEE 1584, which probably won't be updated for quite some time now. So there's only that frequency there. Changes to other standards, NEC, CEC, ASTM, 70B, Z463, occupational health and safety management system standards, and then changes to electrical equipment, right, and PPE that comes to the market. You need to be aware of these things and manage it daily, monthly, yearly, not just every 3 years. So formal management change should be a requirement for your program, updating your company's program and related documentation, provide arc flash and shock training. This is another outcome of this change, is we need to then follow up on some of the due diligence-based hierarchy of risk control methods, provide electrical safety program update training, review the changes to 1584, update your studies. At a certain point, you're going to have a plan and put in place a budget to update your studies, but have a tech spec and focus on, if you have to, budget constraints. Where do I really need to do the calculations? And it's high and low voltage power distribution, where you might have an HCB box electrode configuration. The good news is, whether it's VCB or VCBB, the new formulas may yield a slightly lower incident energy value. So again, understanding this information puts you in a position of control, right, and managing your budget. Review available arc flash PP updated. Again, if you get the studies updated, review your arc flash and shock equipment label and put in a compliant label. We want to make sure the hierarchy of risk control methods through effective formal management of change is ultimately those risk controls are delivering what we need them to deliver, elimination or risk reduction. We need to make sure that that residual risk level is true. So again, I've gone through the content and a pace because I was watching the clock, and I think I made it so we have 15 minutes that Jim, we could open it up for questions. I had a healthy pace there,
Yeah.
But again, this is recorded, so you can review the recording. But
yeah,
again, I'm a fast talker, a lot of content. So Jim, I'll hand it over to you for the Q&A.
All right. Yeah. In fact, the first question that came in, I was taking notes as fast as I could, and Harold apparently was in the same boat. He says, will this presentation be available on the EasyPower website? The answer is yes. It takes us about a week to post it, but everyone will receive a notice when it's up on the website. So thank you. So yeah, we've got a couple other questions, Terry. The first one from Brandon. He's asking, is there more than one manufacturer offering true color lenses? He says he's only aware of Oberon.
So that's a good question, Brandon. So Oberon Company has been an innovator, and Jack Hirschman, believe it or not, he's still involved in the company. He's the founder, and he goes to the lab still. So it's a US-based company, and they pioneered the true color grade lens technology. And then what happened is other manufacturers created their own equivalent. So there are other manufacturers out there that have true color grade lens technology. Oberon was the innovator that brought it to the market, and I recommend you look at it through either Oberon or some of the other manufacturers that have it available.
Excellent. So the next question is regarding the 3 years or annual audit. Does it mean that the arc flash labels have to be validated on the same periodic basis? This is from Rolando.
Okay, so that's a good question. 70E and Z462. So this whole, how frequently do I do any of this? So 70E and Z462 indicate in their article or clause that your power system study should be reviewed every 5 years. So it's indicating a 5-year frequency. But again, these are just recommendations. If you make a significant change to your power distribution system this year, you then need to follow up on the implications ultimately to the calculated incident energy levels. So if you haven't done anything in 5 years, every 5 years you should document in an electrical safety committee meeting, no changes to the power system, the labels are still valid. So right now your labels are still valid, right, using the existing formulas, which are good, but really good due diligence would be to move to recalculating the incident energy levels using the new formulas. So it's a matter of each company deciding what your due diligence will be now, 1 year from now, 3 years from now. You need to make some decisions there on when you move to updating your calculations, and in turn updating the installed arc flash and shock equipment labels.
This question, Terry, is from James. He's asking, are you saying that you need a PE or a registered PE engineering stamp on arc flash studies?
Well, I'm a professional engineer in 5 provinces, and yes, the answer is yes. This report should be authenticated by a professional engineer in the US or professional engineer in Canada. That is a matter of due diligence as well, right? Professional engineers legally have to carry professional errors and emissions insurance and commercial liability insurance. So again, I could talk about this for a while, but I respect my profession, and people that know me know that I do. That's why I'm concerned about the status of the power system studies and the arc flash studies. And if they're being completed by non-PEs or non-PNGs and you've hired them, you're taking on more liability. The people that you're hiring may not have, and they most likely won't have, professional errors and emissions insurance. So the liability is on you if there is an incident that results in injury or death, or an arc flash that results in significant equipment damage and you didn't use a PE or a PNG.
So this question comes in from Jamal. He's saying, what about the DC battery? Do we have 1,000-volt DC, or do we have PPE level 5 in the new revision for DC?
So that's a good question, because I looked at the DC component of the arc flash PP category table method, and I think it's a huge miss. It's in 70E and Z462, and I've already flagged it for Z462, and it'll probably be a public comment that I'll put in for 70E, is the existing DC table 130.7 C15B. It only goes up to 600 volts DC, and recently I've been involved in some work related to EVs, and we're getting into some higher low voltages. 650 volts DC could be higher, right? So that the 1,000-volt DC threshold right now, you are into a shock hazard and an arcing fault sustainability voltage for DC power related equipment. So I think there needs to be some more content added to 70E and Z462 related to DC, as we see this proliferation of renewables, solar, large solar farms, nothing new, but we're seeing a lot more of them. And the EV industry is moving into a lot more what I'll call heavy equipment, buses, trucks. So long-winded answer, but yeah, there needs to be more oversight on DC 650 or higher. And right now, I don't think we have enough tools in 70 and Z462. So public comments for 2024. So that's the other thing too, is if you have ideas, get them into public comments on the NFPA 70 in the States. Get them in. We need this feedback. In Canada, we need comments into Z462 for the next cycle as well. You have the ability to control what's in these standards or what's added, so they're tools for you and for others.
So this is from Donald. He wants to piggyback on the question from James. He says, what if the corporation has engineers on staff? Should they be PEs or professional engineers, or is that solely up to the corporation?
Okay, so that's a good question, because when I worked for my employers previously, it was a mandatory requirement in the role that I had that I was a PEng, and the professional errors and emissions insurance was covered by my employer. So I didn't need personal commercial liability insurance or errors and emissions insurance because my employer covered that off. In fact, my employer had to have a permit to practice engineering, right? Because we were practicing engineering as employees. So if you work for an employer, you might want to check, but they will cover your liability as part of your employment and working for them. You do not need separate insurance. If you're an engineering consulting firm that's hired by an employer, that's where the employer, to get the study done, the equipment owner, it benefits by ensuring they have, again, a consulting firm with PEs or PEngs in Canada that have professional errors and emissions insurance in place.
Well, Terry, that's the end of the list of questions. Very much appreciate the presentation. It was some good information, and we look forward to your next visit with us.
Jim, I want to thank you and EasyPower as usual for letting me get the word out. My focus is on electrical safety programs. It's quite clear in the webinars that I provide that I'm trying to stress to industry the importance of having that document in place, because you control everything that I talked about today. Management of change is critical, again, to the arc flash and shock hazards, to ensure, again, that you eliminate exposure, or that the hierarchy of risk controls you've implemented, that they're working and the residual risk level is real. So again, Jim, thank to you and EasyPower again, and thanks for everybody attending. Again, I wish I could talk longer, and I apologize. I was moving pretty fast, but again, this is a recorded session, and if there's questions offline, I'm more than glad to answer them. Thanks, Jim.
So long.